my friends would say for sure, is that I love to bake. And unfortunately, I haven't really had the opportunity to do that a lot in the past few years, just because I have been moving, it feels like every single year for the past little bit, or have not had all my stuff. When I moved to Toronto, I moved with just the essentials. And unfortunately, this bad boy was not considered one of the essentials, so it stayed in Ottawa for a period of time. But over the summer, I managed to bring it back. It is now with me. It has been on my kitchen counter, taking up real estate for the past little bit, but I just haven't been using it. So I figured today is the day to fix that. I saw a recipe for homemade bagels, or actually let me backtrack a bit. A little while ago, I saw a recipe for how to make homemade butter. And as anyone knows, butter is going for, it's like ransom right now. Like, it's so hard to find it. It is so expensive to get butter. And while I'm not saying that I'm about to start making my own homemade butter every week, I am intrigued by how to do it. So I was waiting for the stand mixer so that I can make butter, because it's one of the easiest ways to make it is in a stand mixer, because you have the motor. And from there, made the realization that I think I actually want to make homemade bagels as well. So this has a dough hook in it, which is really great. It's going to whip that bread for me, that dough super fast, and knead it really well. I have everything I need to make the bagels, and I'm so excited to bring you along on this little kitchen adventure. So first up is adding the yeast. So I have a separate bowl here. I'm going to proof it a little bit. The recipe that I'm using is from Love and Lemons. I will make sure that I link it for you guys. But to proof it, instead of using sugar, they do use maple syrup. So I have some here that I will be using as my yeast, just to get it proofed. So while I wait for the yeast to proof, I am actually going to start measuring out my flour. Ideally, I would have my scale with me as well. So definitely might be picking one of those up soon, because they are fairly inexpensive. But I will be using a measuring scoop this time to figure out my flour, and using all the tips and tricks to not overpack my measuring cup and get as close to that desired weight for the recipe as possible. So fluffing the flour with a spoon, really making sure that I spoon it into the measuring cup instead of scooping with the measuring cup, layering it out, and all of that good stuff. reason. So the next step is just to roll it out, make it into a whole bunch of little balls, and make bagels. So let's go. It's funny because I felt like I needed to grease the saran wrap before I put it on, and I didn't because the recipe didn't call for it. And sure enough, I should have, because if I did, it wouldn't stick. And they are about room temperature now. So all I need to do is do a float test, because if they are floating if one of the bagels floats when dropped in water, then it is ready for me to poach effectively. And then I'm also going to make butter, because kind of what started the whole let's make bagel thing is actually I saw a recipe for how you can make butter at home and thought that is ridiculously easy, and then I kind of went from there. So we are finally going to make the butter so we can have fresh bagels, fresh butter for breakfast. So it turns out that in order to make butter, you actually use one simple ingredient, which is cream or heavy whipping cream, and you beat it until it breaks down into buttermilk and butter. So I picked up the highest fat content that I could find. This is 35% whipping cream, and we are going to break it down into butter. So we are going to whip all the whipping cream. While I do that, I'm going to do my float test for my bagels, see if they're ready to go, and in about 5 minutes we should have butter. Okay, so that's definitely buttermilk that's splashing out a little bit. Okay, that's definitely butter is starting to form. Butter is forming. We're doing it! So the butter is done. Turns out it is extremely messy, which we kind of knew. There is kind of buttermilk all over my kitchen. There's some underneath there as well, but we have butter. So I realized as I'm editing this that I basically stopped talking as I finished off these bagels. It was a marathon to the end. It was just go, 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 and so many things were happening at once, from the butter being churned to me boiling these bagels. But essentially what you're seeing here is, in my stock pot I have a solution of water, maple syrup, and baking soda that I brought to a boil, and then I was dropping the bagels in 2 at a time into that water solution so that they could boil on each side for about 1 to 2 minutes. And that really just helps make sure that they start kind of cooking before you pop them into the oven to actually bake. So bagels are actually boiled, they're not necessarily baked initially. And honestly, that whole thing was like the steam facial that I did not ask for. It was so hot and so steamy, and I was so worried as well getting the bagels in and out that I didn't like either burn my hand or as I was dropping them in, or accidentally pull the pot off the stove and spill boiling hot water all over myself. But we survived. So after that, I made an egg wash for the bagels, and I have no clue where my egg separator is. So I tried to separate my egg yolk and egg white using just the shells, like, you know, a big fancy chef, and that didn't quite work for me. So I ended up having a little bit of egg yolk snuck its way into my egg white, sorry, but that's okay. It worked just fine, and we spread that egg wash all over the tops of the bagels, and then I or at least tried to very liberally sprinkle some everything bagel seasoning over the top of the bagels. And I thought I was sprinkling so much on top, but as soon as I finished my first pass, I realized that those looked like the saddest everything bagels I've ever seen. So I went back in and kept sprinkling it over top of the bagel so that they could truly be like almost crusted in seasoning before I had to pop them in the oven for about 20 minutes. Looking at this, I definitely know that I can make everything bagel seasoning myself. I think if it's something that I'm doing more frequently, I would, just because it is definitely cheaper than buying the store-bought one. But currently I use the store-bought one on just about everything from avocados to like cream cheese, so that's what I had on hand. Let's get back to the butter, and let me tell you, this was an experience. At this point, I was feeling pretty confident because really there wasn't much that I had to do. The mixer did the majority of the work, separating that, well, breaking down, I guess, the whipping cream into the milk and the butter components. And then the next step sounded really simple. It said that I just needed to strain the butter from the milk, which you can see me doing here, and all that milk is kind of running off and the butter is staying in the strainer. But after that, it just went downhill with the next set of directions, and well, I'll just let you hear it yourself. Everything I've heard says to like squeeze essentially all the water out of it. So there's already this much buttermilk that just naturally separated from it. So essentially I need to use my hands and just like wring all the excess water out of this so that we're left with pure butter. So let's see. I don't know if maybe I should like dump this. Okay, we're gonna pause.
So I basically knew as soon as I put my hand in that butter that squeezing it by hand was not for me. It felt so slimy. It was like regular butter that you would buy in the store, but as if it was like dipped in water. So it was cold and wet and slimy feeling, and I just could not do it between my fingers, underneath my nails. It was oily too, like it just was not good. So I initially tried squeezing it out with a spoon through the strainer, and that worked a little bit, but I quickly realized that that was not the way to go. I actually was really worried by the amount of force that I had to put on the spoon to get the butter through the strainer. I was worried that I actually was going to bend my spoon, which is not something I want to do. But then I had the brilliant idea that if my issue was kind of the feeling of the butter on my hand, if I found a way to protect my hands, that would be better. So gloves would have been ideal, but I did have Ziploc bags, so instead I put those over my hands and just started kind of really squeezing out that butter and trying to get as much liquid as I could out of it. And as you can see, that worked. It's just dripping off of that butter there. And then from there I ended up putting the butter in one of the bags because I could tell that there was more liquid there, that my arms and my back were starting to hurt me a little bit. And I kind of put it in the Ziploc bag how you would if you did not have a piping bag but you wanted to ice a cake. So I started squeezing and pushing that butter as far down into the bottom of the bag as possible, and hoping that all the force would push any water up and towards the top of the bag, or like sitting on top of the butter, and it worked. So I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and applying as much force as possible on it to get as much of that water out. And then from there I just cut a hole in the corner of the bag and started kind of like piping the butter out of the bag like you would if it was frosting for a cake. And that also worked really well as well. You could see that any of the water that was in the butter or that was left in as I was piping it out ended up just dripping into the strainer and then rolling off the butter right away and into the bowl below, which was ideal because that is what you want. So at this point, my bagels were also pretty much done. You heard the timer go off there indicating that there was just 1 minute left of baking time. So as I quickly finished off the butter, I then pulled the bagels out and they looked pretty good. I end up storing the butter in like this dish that I have for safekeeping, so I could also put it in the fridge. And of course, one of the first things that I did was put my fresh butter, my new butter that I made by hand, on to one of those bagels, and it actually tasted so good. I don't know if it was the fact that I made the butter myself or that I made the bagels myself that has me a little bit biased, but it was one of the best bagels and butter that I ever had. And you know, I will actually probably make bagels again. They actually did not take that much effort and they were quite good, but the butter is a whole other story. It was just so much work towards the end after it was in the mixer, and my whole back has been hurting me for like 2 days after this process, and I just think that the effort was just not worth it. So that being said, that was my recent adventure in the kitchen, trying out homemade bagels and butter. If there's anything else you would like me to try, leave it in the comments below. Please let me know if you try making your own bagels and butter. And like I said, I use the Love and Lemon recipes for the bagels, and I will make sure that is linked below for you guys if you want to try it yourself. Until next time, have a good day.